when we woke up in the late morning, it was -7 degrees on the floor closest to the tent walls. That meant that every liquid that didn't contain alcohol had frozen, so the water containers were partially frozen even though we had placed them on top of the wooden crate to lift them off the ground. Even the coffee pot had frozen, despite being a thermos, so we had to thaw it on top of the stove. But finally, just after 11 in the morning or so, we got our long-awaited morning coffee. It was still biting cold, around -22 degrees Celsius, but a fantastic day to be out. To our great surprise, we discovered that a wild boar had rooted up the ground and dug several large holes in the frozen earth right behind our tent, next to the path to the latrine. And none of us had heard a sound. We must have been sleeping deeply. And judging by the tracks, it must have been a big boar. And the fact that it had managed to break through the frozen ground with its snout, the same frozen ground we had struggled to drive tent pegs into, only confirmed it. Speaking of the latrine, it exceeded all expectations. Without going into detail, but as you can imagine, it saw plenty of use, since this weekend was essentially dedicated to food and drink around the clock. It's ergonomic and stable, and thanks to the non-conductive seat, it was perfectly comfortable to sit on, even at -22 degrees Celsius. It didn't even feel cold against the skin. And it folds completely flat, just like an IKEA package, and weighs almost nothing. And with this view, it was honestly a pure delight to visit. If you want to know more about how I built it or how we solved other practical matters, let us know in the comments below. Ask away. Breaking camp is usually exhausting and draining energy, but this time we didn't make one concentrated effort to pack everything up. Instead, we took it bit by bit. One thing here, another thing there. We didn't look at the clock at all. We just did things in whatever order at whatever time felt right. Freddan and I packed up the sleeping gear and folded the camp beds, while John cooked the food. We noticed that we couldn't run the stove as hot as before without a little smoke seeping into the tent. So we assumed the spark arrestor on the chimney had become clogged after nearly 2 days of constant burning. And from the outside, it did look very black and sooty. All weekend we've been joking about the guy we'd seen on YouTube who claims you should always remove all the birch bark before burning birch firewood, because allegedly it produces greasy black soot that will really stick in the chimney and clog things up. We thought it sounded a bit exaggerated, figured it couldn't possibly make that much of a difference and hardly worth the effort. But this suggests he might actually be right. Brunch consisted once again of fried tomatoes, sausage, bacon, black pudding, fried bread and scrambled eggs. Since most of the drinking water had frozen solid, those of us who weren't driving had to drink beer for breakfast. What a shame! Strengthened by a hearty meal, we slowly began packing up camp and carrying things to the car. We wanted to enjoy this last day in the forest as well, so we kept a relaxed pace without stress or clocks. That part I think we really nailed on this trip. We shut off and disconnected from everything related to time. We let our bodies decide the pace and the priorities. That's a lesson we'll take with us and happily pass on to you as a viewer. Let departure day take the time it takes, at a comfortable pace. experience the day and absolutely do not have a deadline waiting back in civilization. That can ruin the whole experience and the lasting memory of an otherwise fantastic trip. Since we had burned through all the firewood, packing up the trailer for the trip home was much easier. On the other hand, we had a bit of trouble getting into the car because the doors had frozen shut. Completely. Freddan had to start the heater remotely to thaw the car enough for us to open the doors. As you can see, our theory about the spark arrestor was correct. It was completely clogged. Chimney cleaning is definitely another lesson for the future, and peeling off the bark from birch firewood before burning it. Now there's your problem. The very last thing we packed was the tent, and we did that only after everything else was already loaded into the car and trailer. We made sure to brush off all snow and debris so we wouldn't trap moisture that could damage the tent through mold or rot during storage until next camping trip. Finally, as the sun began to set around 4 in the afternoon, everything was packed and ready. The only thing we left behind were the tracks in the snow. Nothing, absolutely nothing else, remained to show that we had ever been there.